When referring to the word freedom, we often associate it with something positive. This is due to the fact our minds like to connect the word and feeling of freedom with general happiness, which is something everyone strives for. Maybe it's due to the rules that surround us. We feel restricted and cornered by them. Nobody likes rules. Do this, do that, etc. The list goes on. Rules suffocate us and prevent us from self-actualization, which could be argued is one of the main reasons for our failure, simply because it suppresses our creative endeavors. This is how we like to think of rules, unnatural boundaries to impact the social environment in which we operate. Now, of course, everyone is aware that the idea behind rules is the preservation of society, because without them, what sort of hell would we be living in? I'll go ahead and make my point as clear and as broad as possible, simply to add some spice and simplicity to the problem. I say the philosophy behind freedom lies in the fact that freedom and rules really are the same. Yes, the things that says what you ought not to do, the thing that says what you should do, and the thing that tells you what you can do are literally the same. What crazy statement is that? Freedom and rules are the same thing? First, what even is freedom? Before we dare to make such statements, isn't an in-depth description of these terms a necessity? The first step is to clearly define freedom, to ground it into something solid, to avoid further irritation. Finding out what freedom exactly represents is something very peculiar and typical for philosophical contemplation. After the first days, one grows very irritated, because after further inspection, one finds out that, from the human perspective, freedom can come in many forms, in different sizes, and that there is a hierarchical structure here as well. First, we have the objective freedom, the freedom given in nature, to be in a state where you can do anything you want, as long as your body, mind, and the nature around you permit it. If you live in any social body, however, objective freedom is something you will never be able to attain. Objective freedom means you are free to do whatever you please, regardless of intent or outcome. And this, we can all conclude, will wreak havoc on us. Therefore, there must be another freedom, a more restricted one, the one present in society itself, the freedom regulated and enforced by the social body and its individuals. I decided to call it external freedom, the freedom that most people refer to when mindlessly talking about freedom. External freedom, broadly speaking, is opportunities offered to one in a society. Afterwards comes the most interesting part, the so-called internal freedom. This is the freedom based on the individual himself. The freedom particular to humans only, because the necessary conditions are the ones only humans are able to fulfill. The necessity here being, as the name already implies, an internal consciousness and conscience. The last two are the ones I wish to explore further, for they are the ones we humans are concerned and met with every day. The Grand Inquisitor. There is a famous chapter in the book, The Brothers Karamazov, the Grand Inquisitor. The main subject of this chapter is the problem of freedom, particularly an excess of freedom for the human. External freedom for the human being is bad, for excessive external freedom for the individual causes naught but suffering. This is because the average individual is weak, lacks mental strength, and is unable to cope with responsibility. Responsibility which is not much different from external freedom itself. External freedom is opportunity after all, and to stand in front of a landscape full of opportunities is standing in front of a huge amount of responsibility, of which man is not ready to take upon himself. Freedom is suffering. Life already is suffering. Freedom to choose what to do, to eliminate all the other things, to take responsibility, to cross the crucible of doubt and pain. What earthly spirit is ready for this? It is, as the celebrated author of Brave New World, Aldous Huxley, suggests, that a good and stable totalitarian government does not oppress the people with fear, torture, or censorship, but with happiness. Make the people love their servitude, because not having to pick a tree out of the landscape of opportunities, not having to shoulder the heaviest load you can carry, drown the people in happiness. So the last thing they want to do is revolt. Brave New World is the application of the Grand Inquisitor. The conclusion? To call freedom happiness, something everyone strives for, is simply untrue. Adolescents have a twisted view of freedom. Freedom to them seems to be happiness, because the freedom they usually get comes without any responsibility. A day without parents to watch over them, school lessons where the teacher has to disappear for a couple of minutes, usually signifies freedom, which equates to general happiness. But the real external freedom, the freedom you get when you finally leave your parents, comes with something you rarely encounter as an adolescent, which is responsibility, and with that, suffering. I always reckon whether it would be good to teach adolescents, not through words but action, that freedom must be accompanied with a sense of responsibility and work. And if this is a good idea, how? Sounds much better than the alternatives. Restrict them with limited freedom, or almost none, so as soon as they receive a bit of it, they abuse it because they've never had the chance to learn to cope with it. Or give them freedom without a sense of responsibility, so they never learn it, but are devoured by the internal beast. Internal beast, internal freedom. To be free from something, namely from the internal beast, is learnt through restrictions. Internal freedom is to learn that the line between good and evil cuts through every man's heart, that there always lurks a beast inside each and everyone, and it is the job of its bearer to learn to subdue it. Only then can he be allowed external freedom. A so-called internal slave will not be in charge of himself. The beast within him will choose the worst possible thing from the landscape of opportunities. A weak heart has no use for external freedom. Genuine freedom is the combination of internal and external freedom. The genuine free restricts himself when he realizes he is going too far, when he realizes he is no longer in control of himself, but the inner beast of him. Freedom is restriction, internal restriction of the being himself, external restriction of opportunities, for from the landscape of opportunity he cannot choose everything, because existence is finite. Freedom is also just freedom, to be able to choose, to make essence out of existence. Freedom and restriction, they exist in condiquity, and if one were to cease, the other will closely follow him too. Formulated differently, I see existence as a battle between two entities, you and your inner. Before one should be allowed to stand in front of the landscape and choose its essence, one needs to learn how to choose and pursue. The two entities, you and your inner. This inner is both good and evil. He is the beast and the judge. Your tendency to do things that are ignoble, and your conscience, who will haunt you. To become internally free means to learn to emancipate yourself from the beast, to make sure that you take control of him rather than he of you. The conscience will be the entity who guides you, because he will be the one who tells you about your inner beast. In addition to that, one has to learn to pick something specific out of the landscape of opportunities, to create his own meaning and essence. And no matter what essence one chooses, he must keep in mind to always listen to his inner, to avoid the beast from taking over, that he is always fully responsible for the whole of mankind. His essence must be noble, for otherwise he will quickly fall prey to the monster. Hence, after conscience, one needs nobility. And after nobility, one must strive for it. Tie a rope to the boulder, pick up the great stone, heave it in front of him, and pull himself towards it. He has to watch and observe carefully, especially his inner, to avoid the pitfall. To listen to his conscience means to listen to his suffering, because when things go wrong, our inner will punish us. This is why he also has to restrict himself. This is why I argued earlier that freedom is also restriction, because without restriction, the attainment of internal freedom becomes impossible. Suffering never betrays. Suffering will always be a part of existence, and only the totalitarian makes the argument that a good life is a life without any suffering whatsoever. Such is what I call genuine freedom, the most honourable combination of internal and external freedom, and perhaps the only viable one.